Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach GP channel, and in today's episode, as always on a Friday before the Grand Prix weekend fully gets into it, I have to give you my post FP2 F1 Fantasy. This is basically the show where I go over the latest data and stats to help us with our team selections and strategies ahead of the deadline at qualifying. Now that we know FP2 and FP1 results, it really does help put all of our teams together. Now, like usual, to my left you will see a slide transitioning every single time I am talking are the budgets needed for each and every asset needed to go up the budget threshold that is needed. Could be 0.3 million for A tier drivers and constructors and 0.6 for B tier drivers and constructors. So it's very good to keep an eye on this to see exactly who you want to bring in and out before I'm even talking about them. Now, like usual, straight away into the video, hard and fast information, I'm going to go straight into my tier list of who you should be using in F1 Fantasy right now in the Austrian Grand Prix. And remember, if I do not have them on this tier list, that means do not bring them in. Now, starting off with A tier drivers, and we have to talk about Oscar Piastri, don't we? FP2 results, not half shabby. McLaren looked absolutely dominant. So on that perspective, he's great for points. And also, compared to Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri offers us very little points needed to go up that 0.3 million threshold budget. So he's good for budgeting and he's good for points. That's why he is the best A tier driver this weekend. Then for a differential, you have George Russell, another driver who's been good this weekend so far in FP1 and FP2. However, we really don't know with Mercedes until we get to qualifying exactly where they'll be each weekend, because you could have a Canada or you could have a Monaco. So it's one of those things. If you do go George Russell, he needs only 12 points to go up 0.3 million, but he definitely is the differential. Now, two names I would like to talk about that you should not be using straight away in your team selections are Verstappen and Lando Norris, mainly Lando Norris, because these are great final fix options. So let's say Oscar Piastri, we all use him for the budgeting, or let's say you got George Russell, and then it comes out that Lando Norris goes fastest, puts it on pole, or potentially the opposite, and he's 18th, 19th, 20th. We know they have the pace to get a lot of points, and then that's where you could use final fix, because guess what? Budget-wise, they don't make sense. 60 points for Verstappen, 86 for Lando Norris. They're not going up 0.3 million this weekend. However, you could still bring in their points if you have final fix. Then heading over to the B tier drivers, and there's two names that strike out to me instantly that everyone should have in your team. Zach GP's must-haves this weekend. Nico Hülkenberg needs minus 21 to get 0.6 million in budget. Must-have. Even if he DNFs, you're going to get him a 0.6 million. Absolutely phenomenal. Same with Fernando Alonso. Basically, he needs minus 17. So there's such great options and they're safe. Hülkenberg and Alonso should be in every single one's team, no exceptions. Now heading into the other B tier drivers, who else could you use? Well, it's the likes of Gasly, Bortoleto, Hadjar, Colapinto and Sainz. Now for me, my favourite still is Pierre Gasly, just because he needs the least points, and then it'd be Bortoleto because he's the safe option of the bunch. Even if he DNFs, he can't go down any value because he's at the threshold for how much a driver can cost at 4.5 million. And then my differential pick, because he's a little bit more expensive, but I do like him for points potential, is Carlos Sainz. So if you want to go a little bit different, Carlos Sainz would be the one out of those bunch to go for. However, there are two drivers that are a little bit weird on the B tier drivers, and that is Ocon and Behrman. Let's say you already have Alonso and Hülkenberg, and you have the likes of Ocon in your team. If it takes a minus 10 to go from Ocon to someone like a Sainz or Ocon to someone like a Gasly, I would not recommend doing it. Too much of a sideways transfer to take that minus 10. Only for them though. Let's say it's Ocon to Hülkenberg for that minus 10, I'd say yes to it, and same for Alonso. So now with the B tier drivers done, let's head over to the A tier constructors, and straight away, of course you knew it was going to be a name. McLaren, no brainer, everyone knows why. Championship leaders, both drivers and constructors, they look absolutely phenomenal in FP1 and FP2. There's no real reason you should not be bringing McLaren as a constructor into your team. Bar McLaren, it really does look like a toss-up right now between the constructors that you should use between Mercedes and Ferrari. And Red Bull, which one? They basically look identical in FP2, so it's really hard to tell. And that's why I do think it's one of those situations, for now, if we don't see any changes in FP2 or before qualifying, that hour before, then I think it's, if you have Ferrari, stick with Ferrari. It's not worth the transfer if it takes away from having a free transfer in Silverstone, making you have free transfers. Or if you have Mercedes, stick with them, as they both look like they're going to be getting very similar points this weekend, as McLaren just look like they're going to dominate, and it's going to be a toss-up between Verstappen, Mercedes, Ferrari, even potentially someone else for those final positions. Quickly from Editor Zach here as well, because I didn't really explain it perfectly. However, if you are unlike me, where you aren't in a situation where you're looking to be going to the Piastri, Russell, McLaren, Mercedes teams, Silverstone, then I would recommend going for Red Bull, as they have shown the most pace, so it is the most logical. However, like I'm trying to mention here, because of Silverstone being the more important race, I'd rather have, and I think it's the better strategy, to have that extra transfer to try and build your team around the Piastri, Antonelli, the Piastri, Russell, McLaren, Mercedes teams for that race, rather than shoot for Red Bull here, get a little bit of extra points now, and then be worse off in Silverstone where you might have to take a -10. But if that isn't the situation and you can't afford any of these teams, definitely for Silverstone, I'd recommend definitely then just going for Red Bull. Then heading into the B-tier constructors for anyone who is still budget building, and it's the likes of Sauber. Sauber is the best option for the budget building. It'd be very hard for them to go down and not get that 0.6 million. Then you have the likes of Racing Bulls and Alpine. Alpine for the safer option, Racing Bulls because normally they consistently can get into the 30s as a B-tier constructor. But now with the tier list all said and done, let's head over to the chips you can use this weekend. And straight away, I can tell you on the weather forecast, updated, Austria, there's going to be no rain in qualifying or the race, so we don't need to use no negative. Again, Limitless, there's quite a few overtakes here, so there's no need to use Limitless. Realistically, if you still have Limitless in your team, I would recommend using it at Spa. Autopilot and Extra DRS are much better chips used later down the line when we do have these two A-tier drivers, two A-tier constructor teams, because you get the most out of these chips. And then final fix, like I mentioned, if we have someone like Norris or Verstappen standing out above everyone else, you could final fix over to them to get their points and keep the budget from Piastri or Russell. So now let's head over to my favourite part of the video, which is the team selections. And straight away, I have to talk about the big budget team. Now bear with me for anyone who does not have this budget on them right now, but I have to talk about it because if you have anywhere near this budget and can afford these teams, absolutely, even if it takes a -10, -20, bring these teams in. Now, the best team for this would be Piastri, Russell, Hülkenberg, Alonso, Gasly, McLaren, Mercedes. That will cost you 123 million, however, but a lot of people can do this. If you can afford this, 100% bring it in. However, if you need to step it down a little bit, here is where I would go. So first of all, I'd go Gasly to Bortoleto. Bortoleto is still a safe option to use, and it costs 121.7. Hülkenberg then drops down to Gasly if you need more money to 120.3, and then Gasly down to Colapinto for 119.2. However, if you have less than this, I wouldn't recommend getting rid of Alonso because you still need to gain some budget somewhere, and so it wouldn't make sense to run it this weekend. And if you're that close to something like that, it'd mean you just wait until Silverstone to use it. So now the other team selection I need to talk about is going back to the more normalcy that we're all used to, and this one is the Piastri McLaren builds. Now, who do you use, Ferrari or Mercedes? Well, like I mentioned, it just depends on whoever you've had already, because Ferrari, yes, they get you better pit stop points, they could edge Mercedes out just because of that. However, Mercedes are the team we're probably going to be moving to towards Silverstone for the better teams like the one I just mentioned. However, it all comes down to basically being Piastri, Hülkenberg, Alonso, Gasly, Hadjar, McLaren, and then whichever team you have. So Mercedes would cost 107.7, and Ferrari would cost 112.1, and 110.8 million with Red Bull. Now, if you cannot afford this, then I would go Gasly to Bortoleto. With Mercedes, that'd be 106.4. With Ferrari, that'd be 110.8, and Red Bull 109.5. And then again, the last step down I would do would be Hülkenberg to Gasly, 105 with Merc, 109.4 to Ferrari, and 108.1 with Red Bull. And then finally, you could step down Gasly to Colapinto as well for those final few, if budget really hasn't been kind to you this season. However, that about sums up the main team selections you're going to want to be using in F1 Fantasy for this weekend. Now, you do have the differential play that we always see of the likes of having triple McLaren with Piastri, Norris, and McLaren. Now, who'd you put the 2 times on? I think the safe option is Piastri. If you want to risk it for a chocolate biscuit, go for Lando Norris. But then again, it's very similar team selections of having Hülkenberg, Alonso, the must-haves. You could have Gasly if you're like me, who thinks it's a toss-up between the B-tier drivers there, so you go for him. You could have Carlos Sainz. You could have Bortoleto if you just want to play it safe, etc. But the main one I do think you should have is Sauber with McLaren, as Sauber just looked like a dead set getting that budget like I mentioned earlier in the video, and I haven't really seen another B-tier team impress me enough to push away from them. You could go Racing Bulls for their consistency that they normally show a little bit. Could go Aston Martin because they've shown a little bit more pace than usual. However, playing it safe, this is what I go for at 112.4. But again, I just don't think these are the sort of team selections you really want to be running at this point of the season. But that wraps up this video for the Austrian Grand Prix post FP2 and everything that has changed, everything you need to know for the team selections. Now, like usual, I will be live over on FanAmp an hour before the deadline to go over any changes in FP3, my final team selection to show you who I'm picking and all of the above. So if you want to watch that, make sure to head over to there. But as always, like and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Enjoy the race, as again, sometimes in F1 Fantasy, when it doesn't go our way, it can be really hard to not look past it and then not enjoy the racing. So make sure to enjoy the weekend. I hope you have a great rest of your day and have a great rest of the week. Take care.